Okay, recording is on.
Great. So I want to welcome you guys to this month's Digital Promise Adult Learning Webinar. This is our third one, and what we're going to do today is actually focus on the ways in which partnerships between educators and developers / entrepreneurs, depending on how you want to talk about it, can really be a win-win, and in particular for the learners. So, but before we do that, and I know at the moment we only have one person on here, but and I may need to repeat this as other people join, but and Angela, you look like you've already muted yourself, but what we'll do is just ask people to mute themselves when they come on, just to avoid distracting kinds of things. And as Suzanne here, who is running the behind the scenes here with Digital Promise, is putting in the chat. That's where the chat is. If you have any questions as we go, feel free to just pop them in the chat room there, the chat window, and we'll make sure and bring those to the attentions of the speakers and so on. And we will have some time for Q&A at the very end, so we can just kind of make this as free-flowing as we need to make it. Last thing, we're going to record this so that we can send it out, and then this is for you guys speakers too. We'll send this link out to everybody who had registered, and so for those folks, you know, who had to miss it, they can get it afterwards, and then we can also spread and share that link with others as much as we'd like to, which would be great. So with that, go ahead to the next slide, Suzanne, and I'll do that piece there. So really, like I said, here's kind of how this is going to go. This webinar really is a story of a partnership between Chicago Public Library, between Chicago Public Library and the group behind Digital Learn, who basically we're thinking through, like, how is it that, in particular in Chicago, they're thinking through how is it that they could actually start to address the digital learning needs of their patrons. And so you'll hear from Andrea Sines, who is from Chicago Public Libraries. At first, you're going to hear about their story and kind of how they went through identifying this partnership, you know, the need for this partnership and sort of what that whole story is. And then you're also going to hear from Scott Allen from the Public Library Association and Jamie Olivier from Anil. I hope I said that right. Might not have, because I now don't have this thing, but the two of them were thank you. Anil, I did say it right. Thank you. Go back. The two of them were part of the team that really worked on behalf of the developers and really worked with Chicago Public Library as they to really team up and try to design a product that actually would address the needs of the learners that Chicago was identifying. So kind of with that, I'll just turn it over first to Andrea, who's going to start with the Chicago Public Library side of the story.
Okay. Oops. Here I go.
Yep.
I lost the link.
To
Zoom. I can't find the app anywhere.
No,
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you and see you. Try the control, the Alt tab, and see if you can Alt tab back to it.
No.
I can help you.
Sorry, everybody. We really practiced this.
It should be wandering around as its separate window, so it's probably hiding back there somewhere.
Yeah, I can't find the window at all.
Andrea, do you want me to show your slides?
Yes.
Just tell me when to click.
That would be great. I can see you, and I can't see anything else. It's really strange.
Okay, let me get them up.
Oh, wait, I found it.
Okay, great.
Okay. Thanks for your patience, everybody. So just a little bit of context. Chicago Public Library is a library system of 80 branches. Through those branches, we offer access to about 3,000 public computers, and they're really heavily utilized. We're supporting something like 2.5 million sessions of computer use a year. And we implemented a program actually in the late 90s that was meant to help quickly close the digital skills divide way back then, called Cyber Navigators. And what we found is there's still a huge need for people to help adults learn digital skills. And so just this year, we've expanded that program. There is a Cyber Navigator, essentially a computer skills tutor, available in every one of our locations across the city. And so one of the things that they do often, between a quarter and 60% of the time, depending on the branch, is help people who are visiting the library fill out job applications. We realized that that is a huge need in libraries, people who come because they need help finding jobs. And a couple of years ago, we as a team realized that we could be doing more than just helping people fill out one application. We could be connecting them with the kinds of resources and support that might help them advance in their careers in more ways than just one job application might. So we brought together folks from all of these different kinds of institutions in the city of Chicago. This is a very, rough way to illustrate all of the organizations in the city that are engaged in supporting mostly adults, but also youth to a certain extent, in skill development and in entering the workforce. Essentially, this is a quick snapshot of the workforce development ecosystem in Chicago. We, in consultation with individuals from all of these organizations, spent a few months thinking about ways in which the library was uniquely positioned to support people engaging more effectively with this system. And after a series of meetings, we had this final facilitated session. It's a little bit crazy here, but we talked about the fact that, the library wasn't interested in designing new skills-based programs, for example, or, competing or duplicating services that were already very robust, but we needed to get better at serving as a gateway into career services. And one of the areas that was a barrier over and over again, no matter who we spoke with in community-based workforce development settings, was that many of the adults that they were serving lacked the most basic digital skills. So they were unable to engage in online job searches. They were unable to do some of the first steps in just enrolling to get served by the workforce system. And because of the library's footprint all over the city, because of the Cyber Navigator program that we now offer everywhere, we realized that we had an opportunity to kind of step up to the plate and find a better solution to helping people not just fill out one job application at a time, but really develop the skills that would allow them to do this for themselves in a variety of settings. So we brought a subset of that initial group of workforce ecosystem people together. The really interesting thing for us as we went through this process was how willing all of these people, high-level leaders from all of the major organizations in the city of Chicago, the city colleges, the public school district, the major workforce agencies, the leading community-based providers of workforce development, employers, funders, how willing they were to give their time, energy, and insight to helping us together craft a good solution. So we worked with a small working group through the questions on the right-hand side of the screen, which is there really a need for a new approach? We didn't want to just go off and do something because it sounded like a good idea, and we confirmed with this group that they did see a need and a unique opportunity for the library to play a role. And then we checked with the group, what skills were we really talking about here, right? Because when I say basic computer skills, I may mean one thing, you may mean something else. We then tried to gather from these folks what tools are already being used. At no point at this stage in the process did we imagine that we would be part of the development of a tool that didn't, exist in its current form before. We really thought we were going to go out and hunt down the best tool and just use it off the shelf. And then we, started talking about how we would evaluate and what we thought it would take to be successful together to get this done. So we started with this set of skills that we borrowed from the California Emerging Technologies Fund work on ICT standards, and they really borrowed them from UNESCO. So they're, relatively standard skill sets that people have identified as essential to engaging in really life, right, in the 21st century. And they really boiled down to, and I'll talk in a moment about, boiling them down to more kind of user-friendly language, but the kinds of things that people need to know how to do in order to navigate the internet, to develop a resume or some sort of written document, to correspond by email, to engage in sort of online activities like filling out forms, etc. And we use these as our guide and started to map, and you'll see on the right here, some already existing online tools to these skills. So we started with, which tools get at the skills that we were really looking to help support. And then next, we did a little bit of a gut check. Because we have so many people coming into the libraries, we were able to engage the learners immediately and also check our sense of, did people really need these skills? So we boiled them down into these categories of basic computer productivity, which really meant, Microsoft Word type of documents, basic internet skills, so browsing the web, understanding how the internet works, online productivity, filling out forms online, engaging in sort of job searches online, those kinds of things. And then the intermediate productivity starts to get into those Excel and things like that. So the green numbers are about a third of the folks that we asked to take the self-assessment in really basic language tell us what they felt they were confident enough to do. Those are the numbers. It's a third or fewer of the folks who were serving through the Cyber Navigator program at that moment in time had any real sense of confidence to do these things that we all really, expect folks to know how to do in order to engage with many services and other things. We started testing, we narrowed down from like 35 different tools, the top 3 that we thought best aligned with the skills that we were seeking to support, and started observing the way that patrons engaged with them. So for us, the most important thing here was user, acceptance of the tool. People aren't coming to the library saying, I want an online tool so I can learn skills. They're coming to the library saying, help me do this thing on the computer. And so we wanted whatever we introduced as a core curriculum to be easy enough and friendly enough that our users would sort of shift their mindset a bit and become learners and engage in this kind of learning process. And we found by far the Digital Learn website as it existed at the time to be the most user-friendly for a variety of reasons. We also found that it very user-friendly language mapped out the very skills that we had started our process wanting to make sure we included. So this is a screenshot of the kinds of things that people can do, that learners can do on the site, and they very well describe in regular everyday language the kinds of skills that we started this process trying to support. The instruction is also video-based, which we found is incredibly valuable to our learners. They really did not respond well to text-heavy tools, and so the fact that somebody is talking them through a process and that many of the modules are interactive so that they're able to, in real time, practice the things that they're being taught how to do is really important. So you can do the things as you go, which we know is important for learning and retention. And then what we started to do, and you'll hear about the customization process from the team that'll talk about digital learning in a moment from Scott and Jamie, but what we found is that we also wanted a tool that allowed us to help the learner practice immediately the skill they just learned in the module and do so in a way that was relevant. So this is the final screen when you do the online job search tool, and you can see that the places that the learner can then go to practice their skills are Illinois or Chicago specific, so that they're able to immediately go and in a way that's really relevant to them, put those skills to use. And we also really wanted to make sure that learners could track their own progress, that they could feel like they know what they learned, they can describe it to maybe a prospective employer, but at least they themselves could be aware of, these are the skills that are needed so that I can confidently use a computer, and now I've achieved, 3 of the 8 or 5 of the 7 or whatever it is, and be able to kind of manage their own learning in that way. And now I'm going to turn this over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Andrea. That was great. This is Scott Allen. I'm with the Public Library Association, and I am going to show a little bit about the history of Digital Learn, which goes back in time, but it happened kind of concurrently with the process that Andrea just talked about at Chicago Public Library, and I think it's important to see how the 2 products or 2 initiatives came together. So just a little bit about the history of Digital Learn. It was a product that the Public Library Association decided there was a need for, and we received funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services in the fall of 2012 to develop it. We knew, as Andrea attested to, that patrons were coming into libraries across the country either explicitly needing to learn how to use a computer, or coming in, say, to find a job, and it was discovered in the process that they didn't know how to look online or apply online or create a resume. So we knew there was a need in the public library sphere for a product like this. We consulted our member experts, public librarians across the country, in what the site should look like, and got to a lot of those features that Andrea just touched on about being simple and video-based and written at a certain level of language. So it's great to have sort of the validation from what Chicago Public Library found in looking across a number of products that we hit the mark on those aspects. And then we came out with the site in the summer of 2013 with about 14 courses, as well as some forum for trainers, for people who found themselves teaching digital literacy to try and communicate. So there were really 2 aspects of the site, the learn and teach modules. And then we watched it roll out and saw a lot of libraries using it in different ways, just either bookmarking it on their computers, or actually building initiatives around it, or taking pieces of the courses that we developed and integrating them into things that they had already done. So that's a little bit of history about Digital Learn. And I just need to mention the different partners we had involved, of course, because we didn't do this alone. IMLS provided the funding. Some ALA offices at the American Library Association were instrumental in helping us create the content. Chicago Public Library, of course, has come on board now as a key partner, when we also had the chief officers of the state library agencies. And the build out and the design and a lot of the difficult work was done by my partner, Jamie, who will speak in a few moments, from her company, Anil. They really helped create the actual site. So what is the site? You saw a little bit about this in Andrea's presentation, but this is going back again in time to where it was before we started working with Chicago Public Library. This was the homepage. This was the landing page where you would get immediate access to these courses. You would see quickly what the topics were, simple descriptions, how long they were. As I mentioned, we had about 14 at the beginning of the project. We've added to that since, but it was a pretty simple interface, which we knew was what these learners needed. Once you clicked into a course, you would see again what the different activities or modules of the course were, how long they were, simple language. We had these courses written basically at the 4th grade reading level wherever we could. Some terms, of course, didn't match with 4th grade because this is about computers and technology, but for every effort we could, we had it at the 4th grade level. And it's very simple, and you can see there's text copies of the courses and additional resource links at the bottom. When you get in, it's video-based, as Andrea mentioned, with an audio track. There are activities so that you can actually practice the skills as you're learning them, and none of the courses are significantly long, so they're things that patrons and learners can reasonably do during a visit to the library, while interacting as well with library staff to maybe get some help. But it does take a lot of the burden off the library staff to actually sit down and teach the content themselves. We know this has been successful in about a year period, just ending recently. We had 56,000 visitors to the site who completed about 15,000 individual courses. That's across the country, of course, but we know that it's being used based on feedback from our librarian members and from other partners at other agencies across the country in different cities who found that this, maybe they work with seniors or they work with the homeless or another population. They're trying to help them. They found the site as well because, as I mentioned, it is just a website out there at digitallearn.org that's accessible anywhere. I just have to mention, because we're very proud of this, we've also just recently completed translating almost everything to Spanish. Initially, we only had 2 courses in Spanish. We are now at about 12, and we'll have all 19 within the next couple months. I think we're up to 19 courses on the site now. So that's an important feature that we've just completed. But we also got to a point in our process where we thought we've got a great tool, a great product, libraries are using it, what's the next phase? And sort of concurrently, and while Chicago Public Library was developing their plans, we were also thinking, what could we do to make this site better? And our ears should have been burning, I guess, as the Chicago Public Library staff and their partners were looking at our site, but they really weren't. And it wasn't until Andrea and her team made the overture to us in the middle of last year that we realized what an opportunity this would be. We knew that the learners could benefit if they had the opportunity to create a login and save their progress and retrieve those certifications if they happen to need them for a job interview or some other reason. We also wanted them to be able to, even though there aren't a lot of courses, only 14 to 19, we still thought some users may want to be directed to what they specifically need. So if they're there to get a job, then they should, take these 3 or 4 courses. If they're there because they need to learn to communicate with their grandkids on Facebook, then they should take these 3 or 4 courses. So some kind of recommendation tool would be valuable. And then that would create, of course, a list that they would have a plan to work through. So those are features that I think we recognized immediately were valuable and things that aligned with what Chicago Public Library was interested in doing. And then we also knew, because of our work as the Public Library Association with libraries nationwide, that libraries need to show their value in communities and that they have specific needs around getting back analytics. How many users did they help? How many people learned, and what's the proof that they did learn? They want to show it's a local product and it's meeting local community needs, so how can we co-brand the site with them? And they also were doing a lot of digital literacy training themselves, so how could they either integrate that course content into our tool or create new content or create content that is specific to local initiatives. Say the local school system that has a parent portal, could they develop a course that would help a learner learn how to access and use that parent portal? So those were all things that, as soon as we started talking to Chicago Public Library, would both meet their needs, but we saw could meet a larger pool of library needs across the country. And with that, we sat down with Chicago Public Library, and Anil, Jamie is our contractor from Anil, and started to put together a plan on how we might go from where we were to where we need to be today. And I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to talk about that process.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, everyone has set this up really great. It's working with Andrea and CPL and Scott at PLA was a really great opportunity to reimagine how Digital Learn and libraries can continue to meet the needs of learners. So when Chicago came to PLA, we basically all sat down and created what is considered a product backlog. But we worked through some exercises and some different tools to figure out what are all the potential features or aspects of this new build that would be helpful to CPL or for PLA and Digital Learn. So we created this huge product backlog. So that's what you're going to see on this slide. And basically, this slide goes through the agile development process using Scrum. I'm not sure how many people on this call are familiar with software development, so this may be familiar to some of you or maybe brand new. But so we sat down and built out this big product backlog with the orange blocks and the blue blocks here. And then we would work in sprints. And a sprint is a 2-week iteration where we would say, okay, we're going to decide which features are most important or add the most value or other features are dependent upon, we're going to pull those out, and that's what we're going to focus on for 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, we would have an IPM meeting, which is an iteration planning meeting, where we'd sit down and we'd figure out, okay, what has to come next from an architecture point of view, or from the most value for a learner or for the library admin. Pull those out, and that would become our backlog of what we built from. So that would move into that 2-week process of building every day. We were doing development and quality assurance and testing on those products, or those features for the product. And we'd have daily stand-ups, which was a daily meeting with the development team to talk about what's going well, what's not, where are you blocked, do we have to rethink or reevaluate any of the pieces. Then at the end of every 2 weeks, we would have the features that we had set out in the beginning ready to ship, and we'd have a review of those stories that we built out, those backlog items and features, and we'd make sure those all looked good. And then we'd go to the next 2 weeks and go back to the product backlog and start again, and deciding what would be the best next piece to build out. So that's roughly the Agile development process. It's Scrum, but it's also how we worked as an organization to continue to talk about just what is the most important, what is the priority, etc. So on the next slide, I'll also show you guys. This is a Trello board. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Trello as well. It's Trello. But this is one of the ways that we organized our content. So you'll see there's notes on the left under making it useful about where QA happens, what's instructional design piece versus the design needs to be done versus a Spanish piece, etc. Then you have all your reference materials, so things like our user matrix that we worked from, or our wireframes that we developed. And then on hold was anything that was blocked and we needed to solve for. And I can go through these, but you'd go through wish lists, so all the things that we knew we wanted to do, but we weren't quite ready to put them in a backlog yet. And we kept moving all the way through. And then let's go to the next slide. And this is actually the board we're using now. So we had one board for development for Chicago, and that would have the backlog, and then you would have what you were currently working on, what was in process, what was ready for code review, what was ready for QA review, and then what was done. This is the board we're using now as an ongoing relationship, and I think this is an important note of working to build custom software for a specific need. You have one process when you're building the whole item, and then you do have to have a different and complementary process for maintaining it in the long run. The nice thing about this board is if Chicago was really generous in the way that they helped us build out the new features where it can be rolled out to multiple libraries. So any library that wants their own site for Digital Learn also now has that option. And so this is a place where all the different users of this site can add in what they would like to see and features they would want. And we can collaboratively talk about what would be most useful. So that's just a little bit about kind of some of the process that we used on the back end. If that's something you're really interested in, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk about the development process because I live it and breathe it. But that's a little bit of the process of how we work together between Chicago, PLA, and Anil.
Oops, I forgot to unmute. So maybe as you guys saw, we had a couple of participants and then they had to leave. But I have a bunch of questions, and so maybe we just keep going for a little bit, if that's okay with you guys. I kind of have questions for Scott and for Jamie. As you guys are, I guess what I'd love is a tiny bit more detail around how you're deciding, especially as you go. So how, I mean, I know the Trello board and they sort of get all of that kind of stuff, but like as a group in a collaborative effort, how are you sort of deciding what to tackle first? Like what happens? How are you including what's in each sprint, et cetera? And are you working pretty closely with CPL or do you have a list of things and you're kind of just going through them, or how does that work?
Well, it really depends on each project.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, representatives from Chicago Public Library would be in each iteration planning meeting, which were those were the regular meetings where we talk about this is what we've done, this is what we're doing next, and where we talk about what adds the most value and decide what to pull. It's not always possible because of people's time and constraints with that. So one of the other things was just we had a running list of, we know these are the things we want, and sometimes that prioritization was left to me just based on my knowledge of Chicago, having worked with them on the process, and sometimes, which was really the ideal, Chicago was in that in those meetings that we would have, ideally weekly, to talk about what was coming. And some of it is also just based on, we know we want to get to this thing and we have to do these other stories before we can get to that one. So a lot of it's also architecturally, just we have to, if we're going to build that, we have to have this first.
Sure.
And I'm sure Andrea has some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I realized that the part of our story that I skipped is the identification of that wish list, right? We identified Digital Learn as the most user-friendly tool that met all of our learning objectives, but we also found a lot of things that we would have loved to reinvent, and that's when we reached out to PLA and to Anil and said, hey guys, would you be open to making these modifications? Because we found that for our users to really make the kind of progress we want, we would love to see the ability to log in and log out and track progress over time. We, as an organization, need to understand the extent to which people are actually learning skills on this site. So can you build out the analytics that would allow us to know someone completed this course and they completed the assessment for the course successfully? Okay, we can sort of say we're helping people learn skills. Those kinds of things came to us through observation of the learners and through conversations with the cyber navigators, who we were asking to use this tool to implement more of a blended learning approach to what they were doing in the libraries. And so we had a pretty robust wish list, and I think the process of going back and forth with Jamie and her team about which of these things sounded really simple but actually ended up being complicated. We definitely decided on the analytics side to forego building anything that allowed us to track individual learners, that allowed the instructors to know what was going on with their specific users. We're focused more on kind of in aggregate how many learners are learning. And we made that decision really early on when Jamie said, well, it's a fork in the road. We're either going to go that way or that way. This way is very, very complicated, right? Architecturally and all of these things. Is it really worthwhile for us to build it that way? And when we went back to our teams and said, how likely are you to use that information? If you understand what's going on with an individual learner, what will you do with that knowledge? And there really wasn't a lot there. So we decided to go with the easier, less labor intensive, but also more practical route based on our use case, right?
And if I could just jump in and talk a little bit about, I can kind of run through a few more of the slides that show some of those individual decisions, kind of the wish list translated into reality a little bit. So for instance, you can see on the screen now, I think the login screen as we've developed it, and just the number of decisions and details that went into this through that back and forth process is pretty incredible. And it really helped us as the host and sponsor of the site develop something we knew would be useful for libraries. So for instance, you need an email to log in. We debated, should there be a username or an email, and defaulted to email because that's a very common thing for people to use to log in, and we wanted the learners to get used to that. But we also recognize these learners may not have an email address yet. So you can see right under the emails box, it says don't have an email, click here, and you can do that tutorial to create an email before you need to sign up. Similarly, the default on this is to show the passwords so people can see it as they type it, as opposed to what you normally see on websites, which is that the password is hidden. Again, accommodating the type of learner that we expected to be using this site, and that was verified for us by the Chicago Public Library staff and the cyber navigators, who kind of confirmed that this will work better for our users. And we didn't ask for a lot of information, but we did at the last, during one of the decision points, decide to add, a field where they could affiliate with their branch library as something that we saw both as value for the learner, but also for the system. Again, deciding how we would create that pathway to the different courses to create a course list. Simple questions, only 3. This is actually not the way it plays out. I think if you actually go through the process, you see 1 question at a time, but we're just showing for the purposes of this all the questions. Very simple, not going into a lot of detail, but again, that was part of the back and forth. What are the right questions to ask and at what level of detail? This just shows, I think, some of the interface of when you are in the course, you see your plan, you see what courses it's put on there, and then there's some color coding to show what you've completed versus what you still need to do, and the option to go back at any time. It's the bottom left button, ready to learn more, how to go back and retake the quiz. And that was, again, part of the discussion process, knowing from the great staff at Chicago Public Library who are interacting with these people every day, what are they going to do if they finish their courses? How do we want them to go back and add more or continue their learning? So building that in as a feature that we thought would work for a lot of libraries. And just to keep going quickly, again, we're building this both for the learner, but for the library. So we had a lot of great input from Chicago on how to build a backend, which we didn't even have for the administrators who would be managing the content and the learners. So you can just see here, it's fairly simple, but it gets to the needs that they had. In terms of courses, first, if you look down the middle, you'll see the courses, the topics, the language, and then publication status. So it's very simple for the staff to basically, when we put a new course out on Digital Learn, they can review it and then publish it on their sub-site. So on the Chicago Public Library site right now, you can see the ones that we had at the time I took the screenshot. You can add a new course if they wanted to put their own course up or had content that would work in the site that was not published from Digital Learn. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see they can get quick reports, completion reports, see user accounts, a couple quick menu items there to make it easy for them to administer their backend. When they publish a course, you can see they can change the title, the contributor, the course summary, the course description, which gives them some ability to maybe tie it to something they're doing locally. If they wanted to make it display a little differently than it does on the main Digital Learn site to connect to a Chicago initiative, they can edit those descriptions. And then on the second box there, you can see where places that they can put post-course attachments. So Andrea showed this earlier, how that they could put some local, say, job resources that Cook County or Chicago users can access. So we built in a place for them to add that. And again, based on the back and forth, talking about, well, what type of content would you want to add, and how can we do that in a way that isn't a huge development project for us to be able to create, something that's consistent and easy to plug in without having your staff needing to know, computer language and development, be able to be developers themselves, but also being flexible so that it's fairly simple. And here's how it displays. I think Andrea showed an earlier version of this certificate, and this one shows at the bottom sort of how those pieces that the Chicago staff added display for the user. And that was sort of the end result of all those back and forth of how we got to a place that worked from a development standpoint, that things we could do reasonably that would work for what Chicago needed. And then this is a little bit about the analytics. And Jamie, I don't know if you want to walk through how we set this up.
Yeah, and well, Andrea mentioned earlier that we opted for more general view, not necessarily a very specific individual view. Also for some privacy reasons, but to see in aggregate how the site was doing, what was being successful, etc. I'm actually showing the analytics from Digital Learn on this one, and it just shows how many sessions. And this is a quick dashboard. You can get into a whole bunch of different information and data, but this shows you, for example, how many sessions are happening each day, which pages are the most popular, how many classes have been completed within a month. That's a 1 month view. Which states complete classes versus where are the most visitors coming from, and you'll see that there's actually a difference there. So that's worth noting that, for example, New York State doesn't have the most visitors, but it has a high completion rate. So that tells you something about the ones that actually are completing from New York. You can look and see who's coming from mobile versus tablet, versus mobile and tablet versus desktop to help you decide on some of your content, and also who's referring to you. So all of this kind of stuff is stuff available to Chicago right now. And then on the next slide, you'll see specifically things related to course completions, because that's the real important thing. That's the people learning. So this is the number of course completions in 1 month. And you can see what the conversion rate, what the abandonment rate is. Abandonment rate is if people do just a lesson and don't complete the whole course, what percentage of that is. And that's pretty high. And in a way that's intended to be like each activity or lesson can also just have value alone. And then you can break this out by each course to see how each course is doing and get stats on each one specifically. You can find out which days of the week you're going to see the most completions versus others. And then on the next slide, you can see like a funnel view of the courses. And this is really helpful because it'll show you, for example, on Intro to Email Complete, this how many completions for Intro to Email recently. It can show you where people from the complete course lesson page at the top all the way through each individual lesson, where people are dropping off or where they're continuing to go on. And you'll see like from lesson 1, 88, so about 60% of them continue to lesson 2. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not continuing, because if you look, like 16 of them, 15 and 6 of those other 2 go to different lessons. So they maybe skip lesson 2 or go ahead because they feel like they need something else. And then lesson 2, people just 100% completed and kept moving on. So it can show you things about where people are moving and what that tells you. And then the last analytic slide I want to show you is one specific type of user that we did create for Chicago. We don't have, you can't see where one individual, knowing who that individual is doing. You don't see their personal completions. Again, there's some privacy concerns there and some other concerns there. But what we do have is an anonymous number. You can see under client ID, there's a number there. It's an anonymous number tied to each user. And you can see how they move through the site. So you can see they completed Getting Started, that course, at 12:05. And then they went back to the main page. Then they opened a new course, which was using a PC. So you can kind of see how people are moving through the site. And that tells you, again, more about what kind of content they're engaging with and in what order and what that means. So that's just a little bit of an overview of some of the decisions we made, how they played out. And a lot of that came from user testing and just the understanding of the goals that Andrea came to PLA saying, we've already done the user testing, we already know what we need, we know what our users need, can we do that? Can we build that out now?
Great. Can I just ask, this is Suzanne, just a follow-up question, and this is tied to the blog, all right. When I put out this webinar video, you had this great option if they don't have an email to click here, and then it guides them to a tutorial. What email server, is it a Gmail? What kind of email did you link that to for them to create an email?
The tutorials guide them through Gmail. It's just one of the more accessible and in some ways easier to use for teaching people. So,
sure.
And you can log into so much with Google, so that's helpful as well for people.
Sure. Thanks.
So on the back end side, well, not the back end, but so now Andrea, can you talk a little bit about how your sort of the user experience at this point? I am assuming now you're either piloting at this point, or you're have implemented the changes so far, and I know they're still going, it's still ongoing, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we onboarded all of the 60 or so cyber navigators and our adult services librarians to this tool 2.5 months ago now, 3 months ago now, and basically told them that, you know, we were going to support their introduction of this tool to patrons as appropriate. And it's just in the last few weeks that we've started to really dig into the analytics to understand the extent to which people are using it, and especially by site. So what we found is that in some sites and with some of the team members, they have gotten really good at introducing this new way to learn, or this learning experience to patrons, that, again, going back to the context, like, they often come in, the learners come in not as learners, they come in as, please help me fill out this form right now. And so our work is now on the human side, helping our cyber navigators, our staff, say, okay, I could help you with this form right now. If it's time sensitive, I will. However, you might want to take advantage of this free resource that we have so that you can learn how to do this for yourself in the future. And so we're finding uneven at this point, introduction and utilization. Like I said, in some libraries, it's totally gone off the rails. In others, people are still having a hard time figuring out how to make that introduction of the tool to folks who have a very specific need in mind that they're presenting with. So we're going to bring everybody back together again this late this summer and have another conversation about making the introduction, do a little role play, etc. What we found is the getting started is by far the most popular set of lessons. They're being, used a lot, to our sort of surprise. I mean, right, when you're talking about humans and users, people do things that you might not expect, and it's a little bit of a surprise. The job search lessons are less used than others, which is really interesting, considering that most people are presenting with this, I need help finding a job. I think what might be happening, and we need to test this, right, is that people are learning the basic kind of computer browsing skills and then going right into an actual job search rather than using the lessons. I don't know. So we're testing all kinds of hypotheses about why some things are being used more than others, why some courses are easier or more common for people to be completing than others, but I feel like we're just at the very beginning. We're also beginning to think about additional courses that we might want to build and offer based on what we're seeing, and obviously checking in with Scott at PLA and Jamie about courses that are in development for them more generally.
To what extent is this at the moment is not mobile? Is that true? Or to what extent could it be mobile? And is that something you're thinking about at all? Any of you?
Well, the site itself is actually completely built and responsive. So the site itself works in mobile. Most of the trainings, in theory, could work in mobile because they're in HTML5, and so they actually they're agnostic, they're platform agnostic. The problem with them on mobile is that many of them are teaching desktop skills. So we can't necessarily teach someone to left click on a mouse or right click on a mouse or keyboarding skills or any of the interactions we're really teaching people. For most of these courses, the content is specifically desktop because that's how the interaction is built in. We do have plans and goals to build some mobile specific content, but it won't necessarily be, it will be accessible on mobile. But I think the content we're looking at that would be mobile specific is how to use mobile devices. So it would be training on what is an app store and how do you move through an app store and what should you be cautious about, like with in-app purchases, because that's a big deal for some people. So we are thinking about that stuff, and we've actually had that on the table for quite some time. And interestingly, all the feedback, and especially, and Andrea can speak to this with Chicago's team, the needs were still not there yet. Some of the other courses we built out were about safety because that was a bigger priority. So online scams, logins and passwords, those kind of things tended to rise above the need for mobile at this point still for these users.
Interesting. Cool. And I can imagine that that's going to evolve, and it'll be interesting to see how you guys see that evolve in terms of what people, your users, your patrons are coming to you and what you find as you go. That'll be super interesting. Because my own my own experience of what's out there in the world is probably right where you're at, which is kind of like there seems to be a notion about anytime, anywhere, but we're still handling a device and understanding how that all works, right? So it's kind of cool. Let me look at the time here. We got like 5 minutes or so. One other question that I had for Scott and Jamie. It's a weird question. I'm going to like kind of put it bluntly, and then I'll go. But what's in it for you guys when you're working with Chicago Public Library? Like, what do you guys get out of it? What is it? You know what I mean? Like the question. The reason I asked the question has to do with if I'm going to think about it as a developer, you know, how do we at Digital Promise, because that's some of what we're looking to do, is to sort of say to developers, hey, this notion of collaborating this closely with someone, because sometimes developers don't really want to do that because it means like they lose a little control maybe or something. I'm not really sure. But so I'd love to hear just your perspective on kind of what the benefits were for you in working this closely with Chicago Public Library. Got to unmute.
So I'm happy to start with an answer for the Public Library Association. We so obviously have a membership that we're trying to reach with products that help them do their jobs, and getting this kind of feedback from a library using it consistently and looking at their data and tweaking how they use it is invaluable to us. I think it just means we can make the product into something that we know will work at other libraries. We obviously had anecdotal feedback earlier in the phase and did some evaluation, but this type of work is something that we couldn't afford to do without a partner like CPL. And just hearing Andrea talk about the experience so far and how, what they're learning about what they need to do in the branches to make the user embrace it and adapt it and make it a learning tool as opposed to just something they do once is huge for us. So we can confidently go out and tell other libraries, this is how you can best use this tool. I think that's really the main value for us, was to serve our members and meet a need we know exists in other libraries.
Great. Jamie, anything to add?
I would just say from our point of view, I mean, we're unusual as our company, all of the software we build is custom. So we're used to expecting to help build out the vision of others. We don't necessarily have our products that we own and then we get proprietary over, because everything we build is for other people. And that's by design for us. And a lot of our projects, we do like to have things that are to kind of more for the greater good. And I'm very lucky to have a team who's interested in doing work that has a benefit for people. So, I mean, we loved working with Chicago. That was a great opportunity to know that we were having a positive impact on people's lives and getting real usage information to help build out that product. And we work on stuff like one of our projects right now is for the Colorado Supreme Court to build out tools to help self-represented litigants get equal access to legal information. We're building out some stuff where one of our clients is called Landesa, and they're an NGO that help with international land rights so that all people can own land. So this is where we like to live. So Chicago was just a great example of a wonderful project where we got to expand upon something we've already built with PLA to help all sorts of learners and really get to expand upon that and make it more impactful, because the great thing about what Chicago's doing is they have not only the software, but they have the people to work with the learners, which is usually the missing piece in online learning. So it was that great opportunity to be able to, instead of being like, this is the product and it's done, it was a part of a process for learners, and that was exciting for us.
Yeah, it is. From my own experience, that is unusual, which is great. Which is why we're doing this webinar, why we want to talk about this as a way of thinking about addressing the needs of these learners in particular. It's like working with folks who really know them and understand those needs is invaluable, in my opinion. And Matt, you're nodding, so I think you agree. And I would say, Andrea, you agree also, like being able to do that is helpful.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, so we're close to our end of our time. Is there anything else any one of you would like to add as we wrap up here? Anybody? One last thought? No? All right. Well, I appreciate your time. This was extremely interesting, and it's like I think we're just from where I sit at Digital Promise here. I'm just scratching the surface on some of the stuff that you guys are doing, and some of what partnerships really in this kind of a partnership could actually be. So stay tuned. We'll do some more. We'll think more about all of this. So again, I thank everybody. I thank Andrea and Scott and Jamie for being here, and Suzanne, thank you for handling the back end of all of this too. So with that, we say goodbye, and we'll see you next time, hopefully.